I want to quickly talk to you about the single best assault weapon in Call of Duty that no one actually seems to use. And that's because it's one of the default weapons. I am talking, of course, of the Kilo. Now, default weapons don't get a lot of love. Basically, as soon as you unlock other weapons, you're going to move on to them because new and shiny things. Most players will also especially move on to higher damage output guns, like the Odin, the Grau, whatever new and shiny thing they see. But the reality is the Kilo has some massive advantages over these other guns. It even has massive advantages over something like the M4, which is fairly similar to it. Now don't get me wrong, it has some real disadvantages. Obviously it does less damage than guns like the Odin. It needs more bullets to kill people. But the reality is it has some massive advantages, even over its close compatriots like the M4. For a start, you can unlock 100 round magazines for the Kilo. It has a really high rate of fire, 750 rounds a minute, puts it near the top of the table. It has really good damage drop-off over range, one of the best in fact, for assault rifles. But most importantly, it has a really, really good recoil pattern. And I bet you weren't expecting me to say that. Who talks about recoil patterns when it comes to the quality of firearms? I think that's a mistake though, because one of the key things in any first-person shooter, and even in real-life gunfights, is to put shots on target, and to put shots on target quickly. The faster you do that, the faster you win. Experienced players will tend to land the first shot that they fire a higher percentage of the time. Not all the time, but a higher percentage of the time than less experienced players. And once they've landed that first shot, they'll actually keep landing shots after that. They'll fight through the recoil, they'll have practiced enough to manage the recoil patterns on different guns, and just continue landing shots. For the rest of us though, fighting through recoil and landing a high percentage of your first shots is just not realistic. And this is what makes a controllable recoil pattern so important. Let me give you a demonstration of what the recoil pattern on the Kilo looks like versus the M4 and the Odin. Alright, so here's the Kilo. I'm going to start with it at relatively close range, just show you what the recoil pattern looks like. I'm not going to control the recoil at all, just going to fire until the magazine is done. As you can see, all 100 rounds landed pretty much in the same area, very controlled, moves up slightly to the left. If we take a step back, maybe 10-15 meters, let's do the same again. Start at a slightly higher point. Again, not controlling for obviously a bit more pronounced at slightly longer range, but you can see it's still very controllable, very clustered. Now let's compare the Kilo to the M4, a fairly common choice for most people. Guns are all kitted out the same, monolithic suppressors, reflex sights, magazine they're capable of taking, commando underbarrel grip, and then whatever lightweight stock that they have available. So as apples to apples as possible. Let's start the M4 on the left here. And immediately you can see the recoil pattern is much more pronounced. Even with 40 rounds less in the magazine, there's significantly more climb to the right. If we take a step back here, sort of 10-15 meters, I'm going to start at the bottom left of the door and show you what happens.
Low ammo!
And you can see that at range the recoil pattern is much more pronounced, would be much harder to hold on target, even for a more experienced player rather. Now let's take the Odin from a similar range to the M4 and the Kilo. Again, going to start about the same point, middle of the door, and see what happens. Obviously the rate of fire is dramatically slower, climbs a fair bit more than the Kilo, only has 30 rounds in the largest magazine you can unlock for it. We step back to long range and start at the bottom of the door, bottom right of the door, let's see what happens.
Low ammo!
So with a magazine half the size of the M4, it climbs about the same amount from distance. I think it's clear from the demonstration how much easier it is to keep the Kilo on target. And it's also pretty clear from the demonstration the advantages that a much larger magazine has. And I think this holds true for experienced and less experienced players. That's what, in my mind, makes the Kilo such a great gun. Yes, it does less damage than an Odin, does a little bit less damage than an M4. But the recoil pattern makes it so controllable that it gives the player who uses it, especially one who uses it with a large magazine, a real advantage. In terms of attachments, I tend to keep it fairly simple. I generally choose the suppressor, whichever one I've unlocked, in this case a tactical suppressor. The advantage of not being seen on the minimap when you're shooting can't be overstated enough, whether it's competition or general multiplayer. Barrel and laser I generally leave empty. There's no real reason to have them equipped. Optic is a matter of personal choice. I tend to stick to the reflex sight. It's usually one of the first unlocks. Although if you're planning to be shooting at long ranges, you can choose different optics. I don't find that makes much sense for an assault weapon. The stock, again, I tend to stick with the ultralight stocks to give me faster aim speed whilst I'm walking. It's really, really useful. Ammunition, I choose the biggest magazines I can get. It's as simple as that. The less reloading you do, the easier it is to win gunfights with multiple enemies. And then in terms of underbarrel, it's pretty much whatever gives me the best recoil stabilization, aim stability, and which I've unlocked. So let's demonstrate why I love it so much in some clips from gameplay yesterday. Nice.
In the middle. Enemy down.
No?